So we're going to have quite a bit of content pumping out this week. Obviously, with today's podcast, we're going to have a podcast tomorrow, and then we're going to cover the outcomes of the draft this week. And so for today's podcast, I feel like at the end of each offseason, it's pretty much one of two ways for Vikings Nation. Either we look at next season, the following season to come, and say, you know what, I'm a little bit optimistic. There are just a couple of things that we need to fix, and I have no doubt that the Vikings, they will be able to compete for a championship. I know things look a little bit bleak right now, but it's going to get better. I guarantee it. And then there's the other side of Vikings Nation where typical Vikings, they're going to screw up. It's just a matter of how bad they're going to do it. So for today's podcast, I want to focus and look on the optimistic output as far as why the Vikings will contend in 2020. Tomorrow, we're going to do a video as far as why the Vikings will not contend next season, or if they're not going to, here are the reasons why. Now, as far as where I stand with it, we'll have to see how the roster shapes up. We still have the draft. Free agency is not over with, so we'll just have to see. So while the Vikings, they will contend in 2020, we will start with a revamped Vikings defense. The defensive line, Danielle Hunter, he recently spoke on how it doesn't matter if the Vikings decide to line him up on left end or right end, he's still going to put in that work. And we've already known that to be true, but when you think about it, bigger picture, ideally, depending on the matchup of the opposing offensive line that we're facing that particular week, ideally, it would be nice to shift Danielle Hunter depending on who the better offensive tackle is. Because, again, no matter who he goes up against, he's going to dominate. Now, you could say, let's put him up against the worst offensive tackle, and Danielle Hunter, he's already going to put up godly numbers, but he's going to put up even more insane numbers against the worst offensive tackle. But then conversely, you would have, assuming Ifeadi Odenigbo is the opposing or the opposite defensive end, he's going to struggle against the better offensive tackle. So if you put Danielle Hunter against the better offensive tackle and Ifeadi Odenigbo against the worst one, then you have a very effective pass rush. So I guess the only question is Ifeadi Odenigbo capable of switching from left end to right end depending on that particular matchup for that given week? Also staying on the defensive line, the Vikings will have interior pressure both against the rush and against the pass. We already have Michael Pierce. I don't want to see Shamar Stephen be the 3 tech. I hope it's either Jalen Holmes or Armon Watts, worst case scenario, or you take a defensive tackle in the draft. Because I just think back to last year, all the time, there was just no pressure in the middle. I'm thinking back to the Kansas City Chiefs game. That was back, I think, the first game in November. Damian Williams, he ripped off for that 91-yard rushing touchdown against the Vikings at Arrowhead. And how many times have we seen opposing quarterbacks where the edge rush is there on the outside, but if there is penetration on the outside to where the defensive end is coming through, okay, the quarterback just steps up in the pocket, buys himself more time to complete that pass. So this time around, we will have an interior pass rush and an interior rush against the run. Next, we're going to talk about linebackers. Eric Kendricks, he's going to continue his dominance as a middle linebacker, especially as a pass defender, first-team All-Pro. He's going to pick up where he left off in 2019. And Anthony Barr, he's going to get you 5 sacks. For him, that would be his career high. We move to cornerbacks. Mike Hughes, he's going to start the season healthy and ideally return to his 2018 form, his rookie year before the ACL tear. Had he finished that entire season, Mike Hughes, he would have got a couple of votes for Defensive Rookie of the Year. Holton Hill can't get penalized for smoking weed anymore, so he should be available all season long, opposed to last year where he missed the first 8 games. And when it comes to the draft, I just have a hunch. I know the Vikings, they're going to take at least one corner in the draft. I have a hunch they're going to take 2 cornerbacks, kind of reminiscent of the 2018 Packers draft. Their first 2 picks in the draft, they took Jair Alexander and Josh Jackson. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings did the same thing, especially how piss poor the cornerback group was last year. Then you move up to safeties. If you retain Anthony Harris, then therefore you retain the top safety duo in the NFL. Now we move to offense. I'm looking at a combination of something similar between the 2019 San Francisco 49ers and the 2011 New England Patriots. As far as the Niners comparison is concerned, I'm talking about their run game and their offensive line. The run game, very strong, running back by committee. How that translates for the Vikings is Dalvin Cook, he stays healthy for the year, ideally, but you also get significant contributions from Alexander Mattison and Mike Boone. They also have a physical, very physical offensive line. So the Vikings, and I feel like we do this every year, we're all unified in Vikings Nation saying, yo, the offensive line, it stinks. It is complete garbage. We all agree on that. But then when it's actually time to address it, really address the offensive line, whether it's through the draft or free agency, 9 times out of 10, the Vikings, they'll half-ass it. They'll do musical chairs on the O-line. We'll take a tackle, move them to guard, take a guard, move them to tackle or center. Just take them out of position. Or, in which case, the excuses. Every year we come up with excuses. And I know the one that's been most common recently is the scheme. Well, the scheme makes the offensive line. If that is the case, something needs to give. I don't give a damn if it's the personnel, if it's the scheme, or you're half-assing it. It's not working because the scheme in 2017, that NFC Championship game against the Eagles, that scheme of the offensive line against the Eagles D-line was complete garbage. The scheme of the O-line against the San Francisco 49ers in the divisional round these past playoffs was complete garbage. So if the Vikings are going to really contend in 2020, Rick Spielman will finally address the offensive line through the draft. Next, as far as the 2011 New England Patriots comparison, I'm talking about the dynamic duo at the tight ends with Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez. Now, how that translates for the Vikings, they have the talent with Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr. to eclipse over 2,200 receiving yards combined between the two. And hey, Kirk Cousins, he spoke out recently about, hey, I actually like the big formations, the jumbo sets with multiple tight ends. And Gary Kubiak, he loves to use his tight ends. Look up Owen Daniels with both the Houston Texans and Denver Broncos with Gary Kubiak as his head coach. Next, wide receiver, I'm really only looking at Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen, he was out for basically half of the season last year, but Stephon Diggs, he took over as the number one receiver. That's fine. But now that Diggs is gone, Adam Thielen, he's going to have to be healthy and remain so for most of the year, if not all. And then lastly, I'm looking at Kirk Cousins. He had his career best year in 2019, but if the Vikings are going to contend in 2020, it's going to be in part to Kirk Cousins. Not only will he replicate what he did last year, and he was an MVP candidate for, I would say, half the season, he will be even better, maybe an MVP candidate throughout the whole year, maybe even the MVP of the league. You know why? It's not because of the throws or the X's and O's and all that fun stuff, coaching, whatever. The whole coronavirus situation that's going on right now. So Dr. Fauci, he came out recently and talked about how this isn't a political podcast. I'm not here to spew, you should believe in this. I'm talking about what the man said. He said that it's possible that sports can continue in 2020. The problem is, if it does, more than likely it's going to have to be in empty stadiums. To which I said when I first heard that, I said, Kirk Cousins, that is going to be the reason why he succeeds. And it's going to be the reason why the Vikings, they win their first ever championship. That's just how the universe works out, because Kirk Cousins, you can tell, he's really uptight, he's really focused, and he thinks too much. And without the crowd, the pressure of the crowd, the noise, and all that other stuff there, Kirk Cousins will thrive. It'll basically be like no one's looking. It'll be more of an audition opposed to being actually on stage or on a camera set. And the reason why I say that is, shortly after that, Kirk Cousins, I don't know if he was asked about this, but Kirk Cousins, he talked about the idea of playing in an empty stadium, and he said it's going to be refreshing. It would be so refreshing without fans in the stadium, in which I said, of course you would say that. And there is something psychological about that, where it's actually true for certain individuals. So for me, before the whole coronavirus thing was going on, go out to the gym, let's say 6 or 7 in the morning. I like to go to the gym in the morning because that's where the people in the gym, they're all about business, not when all the douchebags come in at around 2 p.m. or in the evening to show off. Like, look at me. Look at my bicep. Yeah. Right? So I go in there. It's pretty empty. And then I go to the basketball court out there. And when there's no one out there in the basketball court, I'm laser focused. I got my headphones on. Oh, my jump shot is on point. My fundamentals, my technique is ready to go. But then out the corner of my eye, about a half hour later, someone will walk in also trying to play basketball. And may not necessarily play on the same rim that I'm playing on, maybe on the other side. Okay, fine. But then all of a sudden, someone else is in the gym. I can't look like an idiot. So then I play a little bit tight, play a little stiff. I shoot a terrible shot. It's an air ball. And instead of saying to myself, okay, yo, Randy, instead of that air ball you just shot, are your feet shoulder length apart? Is your follow through on your shot? Is that legit? Instead of saying that to myself to get better, I'm thinking to myself, oh shit, I look back to see if that other dude just saw the terrible shot that I just put up for an air ball. So it's really something psychological when it comes to other people. Now, you could say for an amateur that goes and plays sports, that's one thing. You're a professional fucking athlete. You're making millions upon millions, probably at this point over $200 million in salary earned. Buck up, play up, man up. But that's just how it is. That's just who Kirk Cousins is. So if there's no one in the stadium, Kirk Cousins will be the MVP of the 2020 NFL season, and I wouldn't be shocked if the Minnesota Vikings win the Super Bowl next year. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. We do this at least once a week. The next podcast will be tomorrow, talking about the Vikings and why they won't contend, or if they're not going to contend, here are the reasons why. And then later on this week, we'll talk about draft coverage. If any trades or releases or signings happen, we'll be sure to talk about that too. You can catch me on Twitter at realistic_Randy, Facebook at realistic Randy. We'll see you tomorrow.